Yeah, I mean, I think they want a little more specific. The sites are up on the wiki, full text is not yet, but it will be. Yeah.
There's like people.
Yeah, it's like, I'm all about this. Yeah, exactly. I want these fourth year, I should take one more.
Are you then? I'm
considering a couple of places. This is actually something I want to write about in my undergrad. It's the field that we talk about this.
Question, Joe.
Yeah, exactly.
It matters that it says F there, and then there on this part here, do I just choose?
You can switch, just
Oh.
flip those, yeah. Okay. That's what the drop down box.
That's, yep. Correct. Put NEG on the middle.
Yeah, it'll give you the womp womp. I mean, it's right for me. I didn't know what I heard, but. She'll Go for it.
Fancy little thing.
Fancy thing, person.
It is like nice.
Yeah, I just got it. I'm excited.
This is like a Windows person. Look at you, that's a case.
All right, congratulations, everyone. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative. I said, and let's jump into it. I think I'll start with some of the link arguments. I think the world making to connect discourse to shape our world argument, should that act be one of making or unmaking is kind of the fundamental question I have in this debate. The negative, I think, should be much better on why the acts of shaping will reflect whiteness as counterposed to blackness, but I still think that enough work is being done to show why at least your act of doing the affirmative would be something that leaves out blackness. This kind of seems to be just like the fundamental link in my mind, which is how I end up looking at a lot of the other parts of the debate. I'll get to the permutation in a minute because I think that's obviously the biggest part. But the other link argument that I think gives me a lot of pause is kind of this notion of portable skills, implies that there is something wrong with not having those skills. I think that this is a solid enough link for the negative that gives them an internal link to their argument. Is there something wrong with us? If they do not have those portable skills, should they get them? What is it? And I think that I kind of like the 2NR's arguments on this. I think it's kind of persuasive in the way that they are saying that you would go out in the world without those into something that is diagnosable, which gives them an argument to their hospital argument. Yes, this is an educational setting, but the negative has been diagnosed as lacking in that. I think they have effectively couched you as asking questions to uncover some truths about the world, but that this is distinct from speculation that desires negativity or unintelligibility, and that is a more desirable form of politics. I think that speculation of the negative probably does a lot of what your AFF does, and that probably solves case impacts, whatever they are. And that there's a disadd to the positive act of world making that you do, and not a strong enough disadd to their act of speculation. The other couple questions that I'm left with are, let's see, one that I think was something that y'all said in the cross-section when you were being asked questions, why does the AF have to be the stasis point for the negs and deterrency? And then the last thing that the 2NR says is another question that, the very last thing that you say in your speech was, how do I see myself next to them, right? Which leads me to the permutation, and I get a lot of pause here, especially because I think that a lot of debate in general is just trying to figure out what the fuck competition means, especially in the world that debate is right now. And so I admit that this is something that I'm a little bit underdeveloped on, but in a world in which I think that maybe there is a risk of one of those links, they might be able to solve some case impacts. In spite of the fact that I'm very sympathetic to your permutation arguments and very persuaded by a lot of them, I think in this, maybe it was a cop-out that I was like, there's a link there that allows me to kind of resolve a lot of this, but I don't know, I gotta do some serious thinking on my part. I still think you're making the correct arguments on this.
Okay.
I don't know, I got a lot of pause there, and I'm about to vote F on that, but And maybe that's some figuring out on my part, or maybe if you just generate some offense against them that's external to it, then I'm certainly on your side.
I guess my question is like, I feel like being put in the position where I have to generate offense to what they've done is kind of like the trick of what their strategy wants me to do, right? So it's like very hard to produce the kind of engagement that this is looking for. Like, if I'm putting a lot of the correct arguments, what do you think I need to sort of tie things together for you in the 2AR so that you side with us? What is it missing?
I think something.
Is maybe part of the problem just that we're framing it in terms of portable skills? Like, should we?
For me, that was. Okay. Even the burden of rejoinder stuff, and then I didn't end up giving that being like a link argument for them, but it's the one that gave me pause, and I was like, what the fuck am I thinking? Why should burden of rejoinder even be like a link argument against you?
Yeah.
Right? I was like, it has the word burden in it, but and I was like, no, I'm going way off the deep end on this. Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, no, dial it back. And so I think it's just a phrasing for me in some of this. That really was kind of how I ended up deciding some of that.
Just ended up sounding too frameworky.
Yeah,
Totally.
right. And I know that you know that, you acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But I was still like, I think that there's enough there.
Okay.
Hey, Andy, what do you think about, what if the affirmative had, like, the one mistake that I think that the affirmative makes in this debate is not characterizing all the permutation answers that the 1 and R makes. Go back to the 1 and R. Like, I think that your one and like the arguments that you're making in the 1 and R on the permutation are things that the affirmative should be blowing up to sort of like create some, like, you're like, you know, this would allow us to create a new politics, like situated scholarship, and we could come up with new theories that like explain the world and like have new politics, and you make like severance arguments and stuff like that. I think that that's where, had y'all just been like, hey, you linked your own argument because you do have a plot. You don't allow us to sever. Like, you know, you have a game plan for what the AF should do in order to be AF, and that, you know, I think that might have resolved maybe what he was talking about.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I started a couple of those things. I thought there was like an intrinsic
there's some tension. I don't think that you all need as many permutation answers as you do. You need to just be more careful about the ones that you mentioned.
That tension makes sense to me. So like part of the argument is not that those kinds of arguments can't exist in a world of speculation, but a question of where we start our theory. So like standard debate is like there needs to be a problem, the cause and solution. So what happens when the problem, when we take that problem part out of the equation, can there still be theory, pedagogy that's like productive? So that's like part of the argument, and I'm just curious as what y'all think about
I
that.
like the 2AR's arguments on the starting point stuff.
Okay.
Like the BattleBots like analogy?
Yeah, that touched me. But yeah, I think that that's kind of true, and maybe it's not the place that we want to go down the path we want to go down in the world of debate right now. I don't know. I'm kind of liking their spin on that.
I disagree with that a little bit. That's like kind of what I'm going to talk about in my decision, so we're at a good place. I'll just do that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so one thing that I just wanted to say before I talk too much about what happened is this is like a really odd debate for me. Like, it's really privileged. It's privileged to judge it, but it's weird for me because the two things that I've studied since I finished my undergrad are performance studies and visual rhetoric. So I'm just kind of like, oh, I don't know exactly these could be in debate, but yeah. So I'm feeling things. So just know that. So what I end up thinking about is I really like this axiom argument. I like the starting point thing that we should start from the premise that nothing is wrong with us. That is like really unique and interesting, and I think that you can win this debate and lots of debates on this argument being just sick but you have to answer back impact terms to starting points. Because they have impact turned the notion that there is any type of starting point. That's one way to beat back the argument. The other one is to have, I don't know if I want to say better developed links, but to me, the use of metaphor, especially in the 2 and R, is like too dense for me to really know what your links are. Like, I'm not with you in the 2 and R. I'm trying like so hard, and it sounds really good, and I'm confident that you know your shit, but I'm just like, the hospital metaphor. And a couple of other things, and so like, do that early in the debate, but at least for me, break that down into something the AF did for links, because then I think you get like just so much more leeway with the starting point. And to me, it is a really interesting theoretical and performative question. What if we do all of the AF but start from an entirely different premise? Like, that is cool. I'm on board with that. I also think about the alternative a little bit. And what I'm caught up on is not the speculation part, but the plot part of the 1AC. The technique of speculation I think is really cool. But I don't know what the plot of the 1AC is, and I think that's a part of me not understanding the links. I don't understand what they're plotting to do other than explain visual argument as a way that ideographs get constructed and inform how we understand social reality. And to me, that's not a plot in any traditional sense. That's like an undoing of a plot that already existed in kind of a way. Because their arguments that their genealogy is not a traditional genealogy, but rather one that can interrogate what the history that currently exists and construct multiple new ones based on rhetorical criticism. And so in that context, I'm not sure what the plot of 1AC is. I tried to read this Harney card, and I'm just not really sure that, to me that card is talking a lot about complicity, and I'm not sure that that equals necessarily the self-regulation, which I understand to be the impact to this question of form. But I do think that the complicity argument could be more of a link to this type of AF.
Are you talking about the Desideri and Harney?
No,
it's the article, or are you
No.
talking about the actual Harney card?
The actual.
Okay, got you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that what I'm kind of left with at the end of being confused about a lot of stuff, but also intrigued, is that you have a really sick argument about axiom and truth claims, but I don't think, I didn't talk about this. You don't sound too frameworky for me.
Okay.
I think that there is a burden of rejoinder. The negative should have to say no to the AF, and I think that like you do say no to the AF, but you don't articulate the no link to the burden of rejoinder argument, which is like you do have some problems with the AF. Here they are. But again, that comes back to me not knowing what the links are. So I'm kind of persuaded by like you should have to answer the affirmative, and it's not their job to generate offense against a thing that does not compete. It's just, to me, it's just a matter of competition. Like we said a bunch of stuff in the 1AC, they said a bunch of stuff in the 1NC. Is that thing competitive? Yeah. Yeah, and I think that does make, like, their theoretical explanation of the permutation makes a lot of sense to me. But also I think that they have this impact to your starting point, which is that rhetorical theory requires that we have multiple starting points from different perspectives. Yeah, that's what I think. Another thing for you all, I didn't really know what was happening in the 2NC. For part of it, like sometimes I thought I really got it, sometimes I didn't. And then cross-sects of the 2NC, everything felt so crystal clear to me. And I was like, you are making a world of sense. But I think it's because you lose a lot of the analogy, metaphor, language in your cross-sects, and you're just like really real about it. And then I'm like, I totally get this. And then parts of the 2NR, I'm like, nope, I'm back to the hospital, and I'm not sure. You know what I mean? And I feel like I get it somewhat, but not enough to be like, that's a real good link. Yeah, a couple of things for you all. I think that you need to say that there is a rhetorical criticism of the ideas of speculation and incomprehensibility as like solvency mechanisms, because like just use rhetorical criticism. This is always interpreted by audiences based on identification, so intent is relevant, the author is dead. It doesn't matter that you say that you're on politics of incomprehensibility, because someone will always interpret that and make it what it is. It's not what you think you say, it's what other people think you've said. That matters.
Yeah. Is that the Roland Barthes death of the author argument you're referring
Yeah.
to?
That would be what, okay.
Or Derrida, or like anybody that has written anything, Burke, ever.
You think that's persuasive, coupled with our argument about the importance of persuasion?
Yeah.
Like, the
Yeah.
audience
Well,
is what matters and not the individual perspective for developing a political
yeah, and it's not
strategy.
that individual perspectives don't matter, it's just like that's not how rhetoric works, and the 1AC was about rhetoric, so this like random floating bubble of thing, I'm not sure. And the other things that I think that the 2AR really needs the 1A argument that inevitably judges will interpret, interpolate, make
yeah,
comprehensible
that's right.
what was incomprehensible, and that goes back to my argument about rhetoric, which is like,
I forget to extend that.
I don't know.
I was like,
don't
do I
really
have to
know.
just be like, I voted neg and leave? Like,
That was like, and honestly, the 1AR was making me so nervous because I felt like you were just like losing it a little bit, like you're just like not talking at me enough, and then you said this thing, and I was like, that's gold. That's just gold. You're talking about rhetoric, and then the 2AR doesn't say it, and I'm just like irritated. But I'm fine. Don't worry.
It comes in sprigs and bursts.
Yeah, it comes and goes in waves. The other thing is, I think that to answer back certain kinds of arguments, you need to look into visual rhetoric scholarship in the area of body rhetoric, or the rhetoric of bodies,
Okay.
because those things also mean in ways that we, like intent becomes irrelevant in certain ways. And the other thing is, it seems like your F has lots of things about visual argument, lots of things about ideographs. You're missing the things about visual ideographs. Have
Okay.
you read these things?
I've read some of them, but I
Okay,
haven't got
like the Dana
hard
Cloud
read.
essay on Afghani women and the process of veiling, you should look at that.
Yeah.
It might not give you, it's
Dana
not gonna,
Cloud?
Dana Cloud, it's not gonna give you cards about your app, but it's gonna
No,
give you a
but it'll
vocabulary
teach you
for
how
talking
to-
about visual ideographs, because it's almost like you don't know you're talking about visual ideographs, but you are. And so like, there's that.
Is
There's-
that the argument that I'm talking about when I say Rosie the Riveter sticks
Yeah.
with us
Yeah.
longer than a radio broadcast?
Well, I think you're making a jump when you say it sticks with us longer,
Yeah.
but just that it creates that type of iconic meaning
Yeah.
that resonates in ways that we don't necessarily always have the ability to describe.
Images actually dissipate
Images
relatively quickly.
plus words. Visual art.
There's a cool article about visual ideographs that was written by Raylan Dupre Schwartz. She was a
Dupre
former,
Schwartz?
yeah, she is a former debater for Vermont, and then was at Wake GTA and was at Iowa for a while. And she wrote an article about, you know, that National Geographic cover with the Afghani girl's eyes.
Yeah,
You know,
okay. Yeah,
she
yeah,
wrote
yeah.
all about National Geographic and the way that the visuals of National Geographic sort of like prop up hegemonic U.S. imperialism and stuff like that. I think it was in like Argumentation and Advocacy maybe like 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
So you may want to check that out. If you email me later, I'll give you her like, I'll spell her name out. So
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
So I largely agree with Ally. I end up voting on the permutation. I think that, just to cut to the chase, I think that 2 things that you guys could do better for me would be, one, I also think that the link to impact sort of like explanation needs to be better on this policing argument. I think that your evidence just kind of like, maybe it's just the way that you have it highlighted, but it just sort of like, when I read it, it's like making this assertion. And I'm sitting here like, okay, like, you know, your card like says this, but where's sort of the next step of kind of, you know, adding some texture to that, adding some depth to that. So I think that focusing more around that policing argument, and the other argument that I think that the AF is sort of undercovering and you're sort of not like really capitalizing on, is just these arguments about how you know, like the black body like really can't participate in humanity, and that these recuperative projects are always sort of doomed to failure. Now there's a little bit of that where you're talking about how, you know, you're like, you take us, you know, you give one thing and then, you know, there's some other thing that ends up, you know, policing black bodies. Like, I just think that you could do a little more on sort of the impact level of that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I just think that, you know, there's not enough of a link and impact to your argument, and they've got these arguments about why their visual rhetorical method, this ideograph stuff, like maybe is good, and then these multiple starting points, good arguments that I think form enough of a reason for me to say that the AF is a decent idea. Or at least, you know, something that I can vote for. I really do think that, I want to reiterate that the extended metaphor isn't as helpful as just sort of like, because it just allows Leonardi to just be like, this isn't a hospital, this isn't, you know, like all of the 2AR stuff, you know, ends up persuading me to some degree. I also think that describing with a little more nuance what it means to say that there's nothing wrong with blackness, so there's nothing wrong with you, because in the 2AR, he says, that was what the 1AC said, the whole point is that there isn't anything wrong with that, right? You know, and that's why all the way that we've talked about marijuana has been fucked up. And I think that your argument is obviously, has more layers than that, because it's not just about how, you know, marijuana policy has been mapped onto blackness and stuff, it's also about maybe this debate and you all and all that, but I think that just sort of, spending some more time making those sort of levels distinct, I think would help me, help convince me that they're not able to perm your argument. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to say that hasn't been covered otherwise by these two.
So part of the link for me is that I'm thinking of is like the actual like what y'all saw on the projector. So like these
Yeah,
images.
the consumption arguments that are earlier in the debate, sort of like, that, you know, they're just putting this up here for us to consume, like,
Mhm.
I think that, like, where's that stuff? That was a link that I definitely understood and maybe had some,
Okay.
yeah. Anyways, go ahead, sorry to interrupt.
No, but so like that imaging, and then that imaging obviously is tied to black as pathological as object. So it's our argument. It's, I guess, supposed to be that if it's true that there was nothing wrong with us to begin with, then we don't have to add. We don't have to, like, I guess, speaking or imaging that narrative gives it validity. So like when Moten
Yeah.
was like the
Yeah.
wholly rationalized that were non-falsifiable claims to begin with. So that's like, for me, what that's supposed to be saying. How do I develop that better or make that more clear? Was that clear initially?
I thought I understood that much better earlier in the debate, and I just don't, like, I mean, is there a point in your 2NR where you think you're like comprehensively sort of extending that? Because I didn't really get that. I thought that that you're right, that like if all these things are complete bullshit, then maybe the better strategy is to just not like give them the time of day. Like we all know that like marijuana policy was built upon some messed up justifications.
That
you
should
know?
be an argument you make.
Yeah,
like,
like-
they're like, we've done something new and creative and contributed. Well,
Yeah, it's-
kind of as like undergrad research paper, but like grand scheme of thing. I like your like, grand scheme of things, we kind of knew this stuff.
Yeah, it's like when people share in my Facebook feed like this diatribe by Rush Limbaugh about the latest thing, and it's like, well, no shit, right? You know what I mean? Like, why are we wasting bandwidth on this? You know, and the same analogy applies here. That like, yeah, Reefer Madness was stupid. Like, what, you know? So I think that you definitely talked about that in the 2NC. And I had kind of forgotten about it. It was only once I got back to reading your Moten card again that I was like, oh yeah, this argument was early in the debate, and I thought that it was pretty good. I think that obviously the debate, drifts off into another direction, but recentering that argument, spending more time on it, would definitely be something that I would consider to be one of your stronger link arguments.
Okay, and then the other things, like, obviously, like, since the structure of this arg is, like, to invert, like, problem cost solution, is there, if, obviously, like, all the links we would identify are dealing with the AFF's inherency claims, so I'm fearful of, like, if it's an inherency claim, if these images are what the affirmative has identified the problem, I'm afraid of how do I, like, get my way out of misreading the 1AC when they're like, oh my god, that's exactly, we've identified that as the problem. Like, we don't say that is a good thing. So I guess how do I avoid, like the 1AC in this instance was a rereading or revisualization of those images, but our argument is that propagating those images in the first place. I guess I'm afraid of.
Yeah, I'm gonna pose a question to you that I don't know the answer to, but I think that can like give you a way to think about how to come up with this link, which is why do they feel the need to recirculate these images that we already know are racist and fucked up?
Okay.
Like why? Why does that? We already know it all. What is it voyeurism? Is it like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I feel like that puts you in the direction of a certain kind of link argument.
Okay.
That avoids the inherency question.
Okay.
And I was trying to think of this link argument as the debate was going on, and I just like don't know it.
Mhm.
I don't know, but something is there.
Okay.
There's some desire to reconstruct these images of Black people as needing our attention.
Well, and you can even talk about how sort of like, I don't know, like if you were like, hey, they have this marijuana app and they're gonna like show some shit, and you just sort of asked me, what do you think it would be? Like, I pretty much could have mapped out like what they showed. Like, I think that there's something sort of, and I'm not trying to like bash you all, like, but I think that there is something sort of trite and formulaic about the way that they sort of do this. It's like, here's a couple quotes about the Turks and the Jews and the blacks, and here's a picture of this white girl that we're going to juxtapose with this thing about black people. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
right,
so
right.
I think that you could argue that they're not really new or groundbreaking. That what they inaugurate is they think it's novel, but it's really not, and it just risks. They don't have control over the meaning of this stuff.
Okay.
And there could be subconscious or other things in play that could, sort of create your negative kind of impacts.
Okay.
how did you all interpret the 1AC, like with the use of the images and them telling the story? Because I know they say that they don't interpret it for you, that you all have the power to do that yourself. Like, what thoughts did you all have, like, just out of from my curiosity?
Kind of what we're saying now is like, oh, yeah, marijuana sure was racist.
You felt like you were throwing criticism?
Yeah, I mean, like, nothing that I didn't really think before, but
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel the same way. I think that there were a couple. I thought that I kind of laughed a little bit at the Coke girl just because she had her pinky up. And all. Like, I think that's kind of a, you know, that was the photo that actually was like the most interesting to me, just because it was the one that I don't know was like sort of the most unique. Like I've seen some of those quotes. I've seen the anti-marijuana ads from the 30s. But yeah, I don't know. Interpretation's complex. It's like I can't even really recall what I was thinking at each individual point.
Okay, and then sorry, I think I have two more, but the first is the Reeves evidence. So if the status quo is one that projects blackness as objecthood, and there's nothing, and if we win the axiom that there is nothing wrong with us, then that object should have some form of epistemic value. I'm curious as to how you all are reading that piece of evidence as an impact, sort of. Like that, it's like the middle of the card is like when we try to push objects into subjecthood. So like specifically like when Leonardi's like in the 2AR, where is it?
I don't know.
Oh, that we can shape our own subjectivity, like that, those kinds of claims, and then obviously with the portable skills argument that we can become and move into humanism, that disavows of the value that comes with the object, and that value could perhaps be this axiom claim. So I'm curious as to how that, or if that was clear at all.
I was unclear during the debate. I know that, and that it didn't really kind of start to click with me until after. And even then, I don't know. Whenever that debate was occurring, I was definitely a little confused.
Okay.
It made, I don't know. I mean, I do end up kind of resolving that on your side. Like that was why I ended up voting for you, because I thought that was the divide between the AFF and the NEG.
Right.
I have a really high threshold for reading your cards, not even my discard, so I don't have anything to say about what it says.
That's fair.
But what I flowed for out of the 2NR was Reese, objecthood into subjecthood makes us ontologically and epistemologically able to generate new axioms, and I was like, WTF? Like, you know what I mean? Like that was like that's like a really big concept smashed into like 5 words, and I was like, I don't know if I can grapple with what
That's
that
fair.
is. And then I didn't read your card, so that's like really my honest what happened there.
Okay. The other thing was that I'm like even just like writing blocks and stuff, I'm afraid of, because Moten and Harney are poets, and so that's how they write, and they're still academic, so it's like hard to figure out what is a fair balance between sticking with the form of the evidence, which is poetics, and like what the argument should be in the debate round. Because it's like, my fear is that I say a bunch of stuff that's not poetic, and then you all call for the cards, and you're like, this is not what you said, or there's like, I end up misspeaking through the cards. So like, I don't know if there's a way to answer that question.
I think that the Moten evidence is pretty clear, at least to me, in terms of how it can be used in a debate to, do various things. It was really the other evidence that I felt was not necessarily, like I said, I don't think that it was necessarily not saying what it said. I just felt like the way that you highlighted it sort of removed some of the warrants from it that made it a little more difficult for me to swallow.
Okay.
But I personally did not have a problem like taking any of your evidence really and sort of lining it up with what you were trying to use it for.
Okay.
So I don't think that there's necessarily this big disjunct that you think. No, that might just be me. The others may disagree. So yeah.
Okay.
I have an idea about that, which is gonna come back to bite me in the ass probably, but I think that, so like, you wanna talk about this axiom, new starting point of there's nothing wrong with us, and then you should be like, the way we propose to do that is via the form of poetics. So you know how people like, it used to be just K's, and then there was like methods, and then there was, so you're just gonna like call it form, and be like, it's poetics, and then obviously within that, you're gonna have some evidence that is not necessarily that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because it also, at least for me, gives me like a framing or like some sort of loose container as to what you're doing. You're talking about form, you're talking about poetics,
Mhm.
and then I feel like I can grapple with it a lot more.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say that I think that the other thing that you said earlier in the debate about like, this, like, this anxiety that you feel about things is like part of the point. That sort of reminder, would, I think would be helpful for, the rebuttals,
Okay.
to sort of, you know, get the judge to default away from just sort of deciding that there's some differences between how you're articulating it and what your card says and things like that.
Okay. That helps. Thank you.
I know y'all are tired and stuff, but I guess like we've encountered this a couple of times already at UMKC. How do y'all think that one should navigate this sort of tension between an alt that like offense against the alt generates links to the criticism versus not attacking the alternative and granting it solvency? Like, is there some mode of thought we should be, you know, looking towards, or just like not even like talk about the alt at all? Like,
I feel like you read an app that's a rhetorical criticism so that you don't have to talk about it. That's like the point, like your app is just a perk.
Yeah, I think that you,
That's like
all
video,
did
but-
fine in terms of that, besides like the frameworky type stuff that, you know, convinced Andy that there was some substantive link there. I think that you, what you could do better in terms of the alt in this debate is that you could, if the 1AR was like, we don't think that there's anything wrong with blackness, ABC, there's a couple reasons, right? Like the AFF talked about this from the get-go, from a position that there's nothing wrong with smoking weed, there's nothing wrong with being black and smoking weed, like, you know, and also, you know, we don't have a beef with your shit because we didn't even, you know, like the 2AC was very clear that like, we're not gonna attack you. We just don't think it has anything to do with our
That's
act.
why I asked for this, I was kind of curious what
Oh,
it said.
okay.
Yeah, because I was like, I think you were going in the direction with that.
Of not attacking them.
Right, but engaging.
Yeah, so a little bit of that, and then more of just like I said at the very beginning, when we were talking about this link, like, I would have liked to have seen you all say, hey, you do have a plot.
okay.
Here's a couple
Yeah.
reasons,
Then
right?
try and
Like,
okay.
then
yeah,
try to link the alt to its
like
own
you
thing,
link,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
like,
Like,
You
that's
link.
why you're not answering cross-examination.
you link,
There's
you're
a
not
plot.
answering. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like, I'm sure that you could come up with a bunch of different reasons, you know, and like I said, I thought that the permutation block was the most obvious, like, set of arguments where you could generate some of those links from, but not answering cross-ex. They obviously have a strategy, like, they're oriented towards a ballot, maybe that's, has something to do with it, like, you know, so just lay down a few of those, and I think that the debate becomes a lot.
The threshold is any plot for anything. Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, good luck.
That was great.
good debate.
I'll probably email all of you. So Jackie posted the status that they just, he doesn't know who's gonna walk
Yeah,
over.
like 2 hours?
He's like, we're gonna wait it out and see who we get in the semis.
So far, I don't feel like it.
I don't know, just ask him.
Well, that also has to do with.
Although, I only have 2 minutes.
Can I get a copy of that RFD here and there?
See you later. Just 1 second.
See ya.
Later.
So Jack, you might think you won't do it.
Who knows?